That you wrote Bono out and occasionally to meet these companies. Are we allowed to discuss that? We're all friends here.
We are, absolutely. You know, and that's part of it. The Web Summit team started that some years back, but you know, even Bono, he says, you know, we linked with him. He said if I can ever help. So he's made phone calls to help get a couple of companies across the line. He's taken a few out for beers in Dublin. Last year at the Web Summit, we held our own IDA event, and he spoke at that. And he did describe the IDA as the CIA of Ireland, so I'm not really sure. In the sense that companies not really sure how it happened, but they ended up in Ireland anyway. But I hope that's our good skills. But yeah, so I mean, you know, we have those linkages to, you know, there's if you reach out and say, can you help out? And just on Monday, our former president, Mary McAleese, came along to our event in Notre Dame. And that was wonderful to have. So there is that sense of if we can help, and we all have this one vision of trying to help Ireland grow and develop. And that's what we're all about. So yes, thankfully people like Bono and others do help out if we think it can.
Even though it's dyslexic, CIA and ITA, we take it away. So Orla, do you want to give us some examples of the successes of maybe the Irish organisations and the partnerships they've developed, particularly with the US?
Sure. And maybe just before I do that, just to mention all the reasons that Mary's mentioned in terms of the ecosystem that's in Ireland is also very relevant for both Irish companies but also for startups. So our government has a stated ambition to have Ireland one of the most entrepreneurial nations in the world, and we have a lot going for us before we even kind of try and improve ourselves. So startup-wise, I suppose that traditionally the startups that we have would look at the UK, to start with, is the closest market, because they need to export quickly, Ireland being so small. But increasingly they're looking at the US and traveling to the US, with also we have a program that takes them to Silicon Valley at the moment. We're looking at bringing it also to the East Coast. So you've got companies like TrustDev that are involved in protecting online transactions, and they've done really well here. They're winning contracts, big contracts, in both the retail space and the financial services space. They've raised money here in the US, and they've also won a fairly prestigious competition in South by Southwest in Austin, not once but twice, 2 years running. So they're really going places, and actually the CEO is based in New York, really kind of taken seriously. We've Soundwave, I think Mary may have mentioned. They again were at South by Southwest. They're involved in a music platform, discovery platform, and they made their name by being in South by Southwest, but not flying to San Francisco. When they were finished, they hired a bus and basically stopped along the way and met a whole lot of really useful people. We have Clickman Labs, who again raise money in sports science software, and they've raised money here in the US. So we're increasingly seeing startup companies succeed here, but also raise money here, as well as the very healthy VC community we have in Ireland.
Thanks, Orla. At any stage we'll take some questions, so if anybody does have any questions, I mean obviously we'll be here for the networking afterwards, we'll happily take them now or over the next few minutes. Please.
So the capital gains rate in Ireland, Irish tax works on the basis that you're resident and domiciled in Ireland. So the tax rate on capital gains is 33%, but that would only be if you were Irish tax resident.
Hopefully it's on the way down. It's gone from 20 to 33 and hopefully it will go like that.
You still have to pay U.S. government tax while you want business in Ireland.
Yeah, again, you've got the US tax system will tax you wherever you live in the world. The Irish tax system is different. So if you're a non-resident in Ireland, if you're there just doing business, you only get taxed on the money that you earn in Ireland. You don't get taxed on your worldwide income. So there's also a double taxation agreement between Ireland and the US. So you don't pay tax on it twice. If you've paid it in Ireland, then it counts as a credit against your US tax.
You know, the mistakes that have been made in the past, and how is it different? And how is a company thinking about expanding in Ireland? How can we know that the environment there is going to be positive and some of those things are going to be controlled and those lessons are going to be learned from last time?
Good question, good question. I mean, can I start just to touch on it? I mean, firstly, things like, just speaking from recruitment side, like salaries did increase no more than anywhere else in Europe from Irish perspective, you know, and to a level right now, actually quite sustained over the last 5 years of growth, you know, even in IT and the sort of sexy areas. Again, property took a huge dip and it's on its way back up. It's still probably half the price of, say, London, you know, so we've got to look at international competition. But your point is a good one, you know. I think Mick spoke about the fact that Ireland had a pretty tough time with things because it was at such a high, you know, around 2008, 2009. You know, the word austerity might be overused, certainly economically, and I'd like to think psychologically, the correction, not just for businesses, but for the country to say this is where we are now. You know, our company did an MBO in 2009. At the time, it was a tough time, but maybe now it was the best exercise we went through. That's just from our perspective. Do you want to touch on something?
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I mean, I think it's important to remember with all the bad press Ireland got, and obviously we've been through the horrors, is that from a business perspective, no matter which government is in power, they are still very pro-business. And certainly from an Irish company perspective, the exports from Ireland continue to grow, and actually last year was at record levels throughout from the time we started counting, regardless of recession. And I know IDA kept on bringing in the foreign companies, which Mary might mention. So from a business perspective, although it was tough and what happened when the banks went through, it's still, you know, business continued and jobs happily are following them.
Yeah, just to touch on that, so I mean, Ireland had a sustained growth period of 10 years, which is quite incredible, and even to ourselves, every year you just thought it wouldn't get better, and it did. But a lot of what happened, very similar to the US and other countries around Europe, was very much construction-based, financial crash, if you like. So everything related to the construction industry had a huge, huge hit. But as Orla just mentioned, many of the Irish-owned companies who were in engineering and other types of exports and food continued to grow and export and weren't impacted because they weren't directly related to the housing boom. And you are correct, housing and the cost of staff and labour got extremely high in Ireland. And we were sometimes referred to our recession as the hangover that was needed, and it really was. And it's been sustained. We've had 5-6 years of really, really tough austerity measures. For example, like every public servant government worker in the country had their salaries cut by 15%. There was an embargo, nobody else could be hired. A lot of very extreme measures were taken. We had property tax introduced now for the first time ever. For the first time ever this year, we're about to pay for water, which we've never paid for in Ireland. So we've gone through a lot, and I think the Irish nation, the people, the government, we've learned a lot from the process. But we've also begun to rebuild and in a healthy way. So property, for example, the crash, generally they say all properties crashed by 50% in value. Our labour rate our unemployment rate, went to 15%, which is quite dramatic. So that meant automatically then salaries came down, the cost of property came down, and the last 3 years in a row with IDA and what we do have been the busiest 3 years we've had in the history of what we do in 40 years. Because now companies are seeing those opportunities. They're coming in and they're buying buildings instead of leasing them. They're able to get property at great value. They're able to hire in staff at much better rates than were possible, say, 7, 8 years ago. So right now, and it's been a slow and steady growth again. It's not like taking off to crazy numbers like it used to be. And I'm hoping that we've all learned. But obviously, the busier it gets, the tighter the market. And already in Dublin, it's getting tighter and tighter in terms of building. And now what's starting to happen is for the first time in 6 years, they're building again. And they're finishing off these buildings that were left vacant. And we have a property division within IDA. We actually buy land and have it there for clients, because you can imagine we've big companies like Pfizer, Eli Lilly, and Baxter, and Medtronic all come in and they need big land and to help them do all of that. So we actively work with companies to try and help with that. And a lot of the properties that were taken out into receivership because of all that happened, there was a government agency set up to handle all that portfolio, and they were selling properties. And so we link closely with that. And again, that's how all the government agencies link together. And we're trying to make sure that it doesn't happen again, but obviously it's global economics, and we're a small open economy. So we are as impacted by what happens around the rest of the world. But if you look at Europe in general, and there's quite a few countries you can imagine have had the same experience of a big crash, they're still stuck. They're still, because they were very dependent on the construction industry or tourism or whatever it might be. But in fairness, Ireland isn't. We have like a multi-layered economy in a lot of different sectors, and they've continued to thrive and grow, and we're supporting them the best that we can. So hopefully, right now is definitely the best time to come in. Who knows, 5 years from now, if the growth continues, if that will escalate again. We're doing what we can to manage that as best we can.
I think there's a factor, just a small factor, we're not complacent about it. Like, nobody's trying to say it's perfect. We're dealing with businesses who take their business seriously, Same thing like talent, to be honest. It's a global war for talent, for technical talent. We set up in Singapore. It's not easy in Singapore. It's not easy in San Francisco. It's not easy in New York. And it's not easy in Ireland. It's a challenge, but we get them, So I think in all those, and certainly the demographics and the education, is a really, really clear line between business and education right now, which will give you confidence certainly on the talent side, and not just we produce it, but that helps keep salaries down. Frank, you're passionate about this stuff. So this, right? I think the Irish government can do whatever they can. So if there's any international law to facilitate properly, you know, to facilitate organisations, as obviously has happened with Facebook and, you know, and other organisations in Ireland and LinkedIn. So I think they can only control what they can control. You know, EU legislation, I mean, the Irish lobby would actually be disproportionately quite large, and if there are noises they can make in Europe to make it easier for US organisations to set up in those areas, I don't know if anybody else got views on it.
Well, I mean, we have the data protection laws in Ireland and how they control what can be collected and how it's collected, and it is different to the US. I know we have a couple of lawyers in the room, I don't know if anybody wants to address it directly. But it is different, and we do find when US companies come to Europe, and we have companies coming from all over the world, but the US companies we find the most, they expect it to be exactly like the US, and it's simply not. So the data protection laws are tighter, and our attitudes towards freedom of information and things like that are a little different, but you know, there is a consistent theme across all the data protection commissioners around Europe that we try and have a consistent EU laws about how it's done and what's gathered, how it's gathered, but at the same time recognizing there are new technologies like drone technologies and others that are coming on board. So we do embrace that and consider that as a government. We have to consider the laws and what's available, but there have been issues, you know, with a couple of companies, how they gather data, what they, you know, the right to be forgotten with Google and things like that. So it is a little bit different, and yes, I suppose the perception from a US side might be that we're a little more conservative on that respect, but I also think that, I know there's Irish companies, you know, interested in the whole space of surveillance and drone technology, and we know that that's coming down the line, and it's positive as well as negative in terms of its usages. But there's a consistent way it's done in Europe, and it's the data protection commissioners, and we have one in Ireland, in every country, that kind of, you know, rule over how you're allowed to do these things and what's acceptable and what's not. And again, that's an introduction we make for companies as they come over to visit, to learn more about what the differences might be and how they need to be aware of. But the laws are pretty standard throughout the EU, and then there's different commissioners in each country that assist with that.
We have this warm, fuzzy government agency called the SEC over here, which makes it extremely difficult to raise capital. Do you have crowdfunding? How difficult is it to do an IPO, a PPM? How difficult is it to raise money for a corporation in Ireland?
Start with private funding, Frank. Sorry, Orla.
I was going to say, I suppose we don't have that many IPOs in Ireland, and that's one of our tasks in Enterprise Ireland is to actually try and encourage our companies to get that far and not actually sell out. But indeed, if they do sell to an IDA company and the value and the jobs stay in Ireland, then we're happy with that as well. I think there is a lot more funding opportunities now for companies and for I'm talking about Irish companies, I suppose. So the state over the last 20 years have invested in the venture capital industry, and they've stayed involved, and we've been criticised for that in the past, but the reason we've done that is there has been some market failure. However, Enterprise Ireland has done a lot of work in that area and now brought in international venture capital companies into Ireland. So we've got Polaris here now, we've got Lighthouse, we've got Sophie Nova, Silicon Valley Bank, yeah. So there is a lot more availability of capital for companies' growth now, and obviously that's something that we see ourselves strongly trying to influence, continue to influence, that growth capital is there.
Do you crowdfund?
Yeah.